So, South Africa could be on the verge of one of its biggest immigration shakeups in, well, a generation. The government has put out a blueprint that might completely redefine what it means to live, work, and become a citizen there.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at the major policy shift itself and, the problems it's trying to fix. Then we'll dive into the proposed new ways to get citizenship and the big visa reforms on the table. We're also going to cover the really ambitious plan for a universal digital ID, before, finally, we look at what happens next with all of this.
So, what's driving all this change? Well, it all starts with a government document called a draft white paper. This is basically a detailed proposal, a plan for completely overhauling South Africa's entire approach to citizenship, immigration, and refugee protection. And just so we're clear, everything we're about to discuss, it all comes directly from the proposals laid out right here in this document. The whole point is to create an entirely new framework, really, for a new era in South Africa. But before we get into all the new rules, I think it's really important to understand why this change is even being proposed. The white paper is very clear about the core problems with the current system that these new policies are designed to fix.
The paper argues that the current system is just too mechanical. It's all about ticking boxes, not about strategy. It points to some pretty big failures: a population register that doesn't include everyone, visa policies that aren't helping the economy grow, a refugee system that it says is overwhelmed by opportunistic claims, and a huge lack of biometric data.
And all of that leads to what the paper calls the scandal of invisibility. I mean, that's a pretty powerful phrase for a really critical problem. It's talking about people who are living inside the country's borders but have no official legal identity, which makes them, effectively invisible to the state. And fixing that is a core goal of this entire reform.
Now, a really key part of the proposed changes hinges on making a very clear distinction between two groups. A refugee, as defined here, is someone who is fleeing persecution. An economic migrant is moving for an opportunity. The paper argues that these two categories have become blurred, and it wants to create totally separate policies for each.
This brings us to one of the most fundamental changes being proposed: completely shifting the path to citizenship. The big idea is to move away from a system based mainly on how long you've lived in the country, and toward a new system based on what you can actually contribute.
At the very heart of this new approach is what's called a points-based system. The idea is actually pretty simple. Instead of qualifying for residency or citizenship just by, waiting out the clock, you would need to score points based on criteria that the country decides are valuable.
And this table shows us exactly what the government wants to prioritize. So you'd earn points for having critical skills, for making an economic contribution, like creating jobs or investing, and even for social contributions, like community service or research.
But of course, it's not all about the points system. The paper also lays out other clear, non-economic pathways. This includes provisions for spouses and children, a formal process to grant citizenship to stateless children born in the country, and even special routes for exceptional cases, like really high-value investors.
This focus on attracting talented people and investment, it naturally leads to the next big area of reform, the entire visa system. The goal here seems pretty clear: make it simpler and way more attractive for skilled people and capital to come to South Africa.
And to do this, the paper is proposing several new visa categories that are really designed for the modern economy. We're talking about a remote work visa for digital nomads, a startup visa for entrepreneurs, and a more streamlined skilled worker visa. It's a pretty clear signal that South Africa wants to compete for talent on the global stage.
If you want to see how these reforms might work in practice, just take a look at the retirement visa. The paper points out that it's currently being used as a loophole for illegal work. The proposal? Scrap it and replace it with an investment-based visa that directly links residency to a clear economic contribution.
Now on refugee policy, a really crucial change is the introduction of the first safe country principle. This basically means an asylum seeker would be expected to apply for protection in the very first safe country they get to. According to the paper, the whole point of this is to prevent what it calls asylum shopping.
Okay, so all of these proposed changes we've talked about, from citizenship to visas, they all rest on one huge, foundational idea: creating a single, universal, and digital population register for every single person in the country.
The plan breaks down into 3 key steps. First, every child born in South Africa would have to be digitally registered right at birth, no matter their parent status. Second, the biometrics of the child and at least one parent would be linked to that record. And from there, this really robust data would become the foundation for a modern digital ID for everyone. This is the government's proposed answer to that scandal of invisibility.
Now, the document makes a really crucial clarification here. Universal birth registration is about having a legal identity. It is not about automatic citizenship. The paper is very clear that citizenship would still be determined by the country's laws and the new pathways we've been talking about. So, with all these massive changes on the table, what's the timeline? Where does this really ambitious plan go from here?
It is so critical to remember that, for now, this is all just a proposal. This is a draft white paper, which means the government has opened it up for public comment. Only after that whole process closes will it start to move through the legislature to maybe potentially become law.
So when you boil it all down, the goal of this entire overhaul is really 4 things: to modernize the system with digital technology, to secure the country's identity systems, to align immigration with economic goals, and finally, to clarify the rules so there are clear, predictable pathways for everyone.
This is, without a doubt, a blueprint for a pretty profound transformation.
Submit comments in writing between the 12th of December 2025 and the 31st of January 2026 to email whitepaper@dha.gov.za.